Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS since 2011. My role here is to look at the impact of data and technology and increasing the AI across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide, right across that land and property life cycle, technology is having a really profound and beneficial effect on the sector. Indeed, our members work right across that property land cycle, from land itself through planning and development, construction, brokerage, valuation, finance, asset management, building surveying, building operations. So a very rich canvas upon which data and tech is having this profound effect. And indeed, our members work across all the different asset types, whether that's land itself, residential, commercial in all its forms, alternative assets and infrastructure. And today I'm really glad to have John join me from InRange. Welcome to the call, John.
Hey, Andrew. Nice to see you again.
Indeed, indeed. And as ever, before we get into the bits and bytes on the tech side, it's quite nice to start off with a bit of a human element. So it'd be great to hear a bit about your backstory and how you began building InRange.
I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, and I love building businesses where there needs to be a fundamental change in how users either procure or use a service or a product, and specifically when it's at a transitional point for how the industry or that industry is changing. So I've done that in aerospace and defense, and consumer tech, and now in energy.
Fascinating. And I guess a kind of a problematic question in the sense, or a conundrum, if I can use that word, is that with so much interest in solar and renewable energy, why is there such low penetration of that technology to date in the commercial built environment?
Two fundamental reasons. I think the first is the financials don't stack up.
Yeah.
They make sense for the different stakeholders, whether it's a landlord or a tenant or even a contractor in this case. And the second is it's full with a enormous amount of friction and upfront costs and barriers and unclarity on how to simply install and procure energy.
And so, with that current status quo of this low level of adoption, and given, the huge imperative to make the built environment net zero with, depending on the figures you look at and the granularity, some 40% overall coming out of the activities of the built environment. What needs to change? I mean, if we're really going to get, solar energy at scale, and there's such an opportunity here, what needs to happen? What needs to be different?
My humble and simple answer is this needs to make financial sense, just as you buy normal energy, just as you lease a warehouse, just as you lease a building. It needs to be very simple and straightforward for users to adopt it.
So yes, and I suppose that goes to the heart of commercial real estate as an asset type, that it's income producing, and the numbers had to add up, whatever intervention, whatever kind of things you do with that asset class. Now, my understanding of InRange is that you're not just looking at this from a kind of a single asset perspective. You're looking at building an energy network. What does that actually mean in terms of nuts and bolts?
We see commercial buildings not just as a real estate asset class. We see them as an energy asset class. So we call that a power plant, or you can even call it a node. We see each building has what we call a generation profile and a demand profile. And even if you are owned by the same landlord or leased by the same tenant, each tenant has a wide variety of generation profiles and demand profiles. And an energy network is how can you create, a supply and demand matching supply of energy between one building and another, matching the demand profiles of each building and the generation profile of each building, so that energy is not wasted or energy is not just pushed onto the grid without any usage. And in that way, we believe that you unlock the financials and you enable these buildings to not just become real estate assets, to become actually true energy assets.
So I think it's fascinating that you kind of created almost like this new term, this energy asset class. I mean, I guess it's one thing to use that phrase, but how do we create that? And what does that mean for people's mindsets almost? Because so much of the barriers that we see in the built environment are often not technological, but kind of mindset driven and attitudinal.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. And to be very honest, I love the term new energy asset class, but a huge portion of that is explain that further to our customers and to the entire market. And we're not here to say that we're inventing on-site energy generation, because it's been existing for decades. When we talk about a new energy asset class, we talk about what we classify as the surplus energy being generated from that commercial building. So in the markets, there's a standard. If you speak to any organization where they install on-site solar, they will 99.9% of the time look to install on-site solar to match the demand of the occupational tenant sitting in that building. And the reason for that is a financial reason, because selling to the grid doesn't make financial sense. One, it is at a low cost, but two, it's not guaranteed for the lifetime of the project. So you end up having only 20% utilization of that building on-site solar, leaving in a full 80% or 30 or 50, but you leave a whole lot of possible untapped solar opportunity from that surplus, right? And that surplus that is untapped is what we are classifying as a new energy asset class. Now, to quantify that number in the UK, you're talking about 13 terawatt hours, 10% of the UK's potential demand, 60% of data centers' total demand in 2030. So it's not a small number. To put that into contrast with EVs, people are projecting EVs in 2030 will be 5% of the UK's demand.
Yeah, it's a huge and significant number. I guess sort of thinking about barriers and challenges to make this happen, what about the limitations of the physical grids we have at the moment? I mean, there's obviously many issues that people raise about connectivity to the grid for large scale renewable energy, the inability in certain planning areas, part of the UK, for example, where you simply can't build data centers because you can't get a grid connection. What's the grid doing to you? Is it a barrier or also perhaps an enabler?
I mean, to differentiate, the grid on the distribution level is more of an enabler than a transmission level, just because of the wait time to get grid connections, right? But obviously, the grid that we currently have existing has its barriers. If you are going to create what we talked about earlier as an energy network and supply and demand matching between two different buildings. But at the same time, if you take a look at how the grid's set up from a transmission level and distribution level, if we are able to succeed in supply and demand matching and supplying between two buildings, generating and demanding, in essence, reducing the amount of energy that is flowing down from the transmission level onto the distribution level, you actually help to resolve a lot of the congestion that's on the transmission level. We still need to have a lot of grid reinforcement, but this is a very cost-effective way that you can create extra headroom for extra traditional transmission level projects that allows for that growth. So to us, it's about, again, one of the entities that we need to engage with and we do engage with them, is the distribution network operators. And how does this resemble if I'm generating on the same substation level, on the same RMU level, or even on the same DNO? What does that mean from a congestion perspective? How does data play an important point to that, so they're able to know that? What buildings should you prioritize? And we'd love to say that we believe that distribution on the DNO level can be an enabler for a lot of the problems that we're facing right now with the grid.
As you say, I guess it's a mindset change about thinking about how we address some of these problems. The fact that we are to some extent limited by the speed at which we can change the physical grid, but as you say, by looking at energy at this distribution level, there's probably a way of helping. You mentioned the word data there, and it's hard to talk about data without then thinking about AI. Is there a broader role here of AI in helping build this kind of energy asset class and help with this adoption of renewable?
Yeah, I mean, AI is at the core of everything that we build at InRange. So if you take a look at it, I mean, our objective is to automate the entire energy procurement workflow end to end, specific to the built environment. So how do we do that with AI? We have a lot of data that's taken from whether incumbents or current existing data, whether that's weather, half-hourly data, and etc. But then what do you do with that data on its own? And how do you create what we call a system of intelligence that would impact the actual workflow and automate that based on that data, not just existing data from incumbents and so on, but data of our assets as they go live, and these energy networks that are going live, and they create these proprietary data that would influence not just the workflow, but the procurement decisions of whether it's landlords or tenants to make more clear decisions that make advantage to them as an organization.
Indeed. Another thing I'd like to get your thoughts on is the role in the broader market behavior of how regulation, how the demands now for ESG reporting often coming down from the capital markets, and obviously both governmental and organizational net zero commitments. How's that playing into the kind of tension and drivers of getting your kind of technology in this new asset class actually created?
So we obviously see great tailwinds happening in the market, whether it's the new SEC regulations or any of the new regulations that are coming in place, But I have a fundamental belief when it comes to that. If we want true mass adoption and a change, like you said, of mindset and a move from one type of energy procurement to another type of energy procurement, it's on us, not just on us as InRange, but everyone that is, fighting the impact that's happening on the climate, to make this a proposition that is a financially attractive proposition, not a proposition that comes with a premium, not a proposition that is slower because it's a green solution.
And I guess I probably answered the next question myself. I guess driven by the comments we made earlier about the kind of financial viability and your view there on tailwinds and it having to be commercially viable. Do you see this shift as being purely driven by commercial imperatives, or is there some kind of altruistic nature here that large asset owners simply believe it's the right thing to do and will take a degree of hit, if I can use that phrase, John, in terms of the financials?
I believe that everyone wants to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, these are for-profit organizations. And because they are for-profit organizations, it has to make financial sense. And even though if you talk about taking a financial hit, it might make sense from an overall perspective for your investor and so on. But that's not going to get us to where we want to get when it comes to an energy transition. What's going to get us to where we want is creating alternative ways for them to procure energy, simple and financially attractive way. That's how you get mass adoption. That's why if you take a look at oil and gas, it made it very financially attractive for businesses to use it. And that's why you had it fully adopting and across the entire set of industries.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that we do have to make this, commercially sensible. But I guess there also are some virtuous circles here where well-performing assets that are maybe part of this energy asset class will see an addition to their value. So hopefully there is this sense of, yes, it may not be able to be driven by pure altruism, but I think there will be some enlightened self-interest that actually these kind of well-performing properties connected to this energy asset class will themselves be seen as more valuable. So hopefully there's that virtuous circle there.
There is that virtual circle. That virtual circle will take us to a certain point, and maybe create a starting point. But yeah, there is definitely advantages.
And what about the thorny issue sometimes, John, of problems in adoption or problems of driving adoption that are less straightforward to solve with technology, where there isn't an obvious technology fix? Are there some areas there we still need to be thinking about where maybe technology is not going to help us? We've got to be either changing mindsets or there's some other ways of approaching the issue.
Yeah, I think a huge part of it is the point that you flagged. It's mindsets. The first thing that we do with our customers before talking about AI, before talking about automating the energy procurement workflow, is the change of a mindset. The change of a mindset is, this is not just a real estate asset. You can actually, as a landlord, a large landlord, become one of the largest energy retailers, and that is different than leasing warehouses or building warehouses. And how do you change that mindset, and how does that impact your business and the risk profile that you're looking to take? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is we are changing a physical environment. So technology and AI is going to take us to a certain point, but boots on the ground needs to happen. working with our partners on the installation side, someone needs to be on that rooftop. Someone needs to, put that solar, install that battery, or whatever it is. So to me, the beauty about technology is how the technology integrates with the real life world and actually influences and what I call gives superpowers to the people on the ground making these installations happen.
Now, one point that often comes up, I think, when we talk about commercial real estate is the fact that, particularly the larger asset owners, asset managers, and indeed the larger occupiers, that they're international, that they're in different jurisdictions. And obviously you've got very different, both jurisdictional, financial issues, the way the grids are configured. How are you working with that challenge, where obviously you want to be working with large asset managers, large occupiers on both sides of that landlord-tenant piece, and they want to do this. They recognize they perhaps overcome the mindset change, but how do you then work with these different idiosyncrasies on the ground?
Yeah, I like a term called freedom in the framework, right? So to us, whether it's on our platform or how we use AI or on the ground, it's building a framework, right? And a framework that has the freedom to be adaptable to the different geographies with the different regulations that happen within it. If you take a look from a contractual perspective, if you look at how a PPA is structured in the UK versus Germany versus Holland and so on, they're not going to be identical, but there's going to be a framework in there where how you adapt it and how energy buyers procure it. And we love doing that with partners, whether that's energy buying partners that's pan-European or global, so they have the understanding, they're able to do so, or that's landlords who are pan-European, global, and have the different understanding of the different markets, and developing this automated workflow that we're talking about to match their need and how they operate and to solve this problem. It's not easy.
No,
but
no. I mean, as you know, it's quite an idiosyncratic asset class to begin with in terms of the assets themselves, and then the different, regional, the locational factors, and then you scale that out to an international basis, and you're dealing with lots of dimensions in that sense. I guess as ever, when we talk about data and tech in the built environment, that there, for better or for worse, there'll be participants who perceive either actual or real risks with deploying technology. What are some of the kind of risks that are seen to be out there with renewable technology like this, and how do you manage these risks in terms of making sure that they're managed and minimized, and that you work with participants to make sure that these risks aren't a barrier to adoption?
Yeah, I mean, very good question. I mean, there's the first bottleneck that we find is the financial risk, given that this is intermittent energy source. That's one. But the second, given that the tenant that's occupying that building is not going to be there forever, and as a landlord, you want to ensure that you have a constant flow of revenue, even when that tenant moves away. So void periods is sometimes a risk that holds back landlords. The other risk is on what we call an operational risk, right? And it's about rooftop liability, rooftop warranties between the landlord and the tenant, and who shares the responsibility with putting that solar panel, and what happens if the roof gets damaged while you're installing, and so on. And the third risk is once this is live and operational. So whether a fire happens, as simple as that, or panels are not generating, and you have an issue with that. And these are all different types of risks, and we take different measures to de-risk it for the landlord. But like any asset, like any business, it comes with its set of risks, and how you have the state of mind. When you have a warehouse, forget a solar panel. When you have a warehouse, just a warehouse on its own, it comes with its own risks.
Yeah.
There's environmental risks on that warehouse.
Yeah.
But because this is a new asset class, and not a comfortable asset class for a lot of buyers, they take a look at this risk as much higher than it actually is. So when you look at the financial risk, our simple way to de-risk that is guaranteed offtake for 10 years. When you take a look at, the rooftop warranty liability, that's an operational matter that we take into our procurement workflow in a responsibility handover between the EPC, the landlord, and the tenant,
Mm.
ensuring that the liability remains with the tenant with them being comfortable, and that warranty is not invoked on that rooftop. And then third, when it comes to the operational risks like fire and etc., it's how you design that PV system. How long these cables are, or what type of inverter you're having, or what fire safe relays you have, and then taking technology and what you call predictive maintenance and identifying if something happens before it even hits the ground. So that's usually the risk that we see, and I'm sure as this asset class grows and grows, we will see different types of risks.
Indeed. I'd like to probe a bit about perhaps something that comes out of that perception of financial risk, and clearly over the last few years, we've seen huge fluctuations in the energy markets generally because of the war in Ukraine and the effect that had. What's your perception around how people view that whole energy market? Because I guess once again, it's taking people out of their comfort zone of managing rental growth and voids and the kind of way they look at an existing real estate asset, and then adding what they perceive as a really kind of speculative, volatile market in a sense that's much more volatile than rental growth perhaps, and therefore they're thinking, how do I factor that in to manage something where I've got a long-term asset here. Yes, I'm busy managing the whole property lease occupier type covenant strength issue, and now I've got another financial risk based around a market that I perhaps don't understand and simply perceive as being volatile and likely to fluctuate in a way that could put me out of the money when I've got some kind of energy asset. What's the way you kind of deal with that and talk people through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends about the type of business and the risk appetite that the business have. So funny enough, I was just speaking with one of our clients last night over dinner on, what their perception is on spot market risk and the energy, how they see the energy moving forward. And they're large energy buyers, and his response was, "We don't have a crystal ball." Um, but you'll have some businesses that don't want to have the risk of the fluctuation. Energy, they can't afford this fluctuating, whether
Yeah.
they're going on the energy to sell to the customer, whether it's booked into their cost of goods sold and selling, and having that fluctuating risks from energy can put their business down. And we have several examples of businesses, large businesses that, filed bankruptcy just because of the fluctuation of energy costs.
Yeah.
Then you have another set of businesses that are saying, yeah, what happened in the last 2 years was an irregular growth or a volatile growth in energy. It's going down, and we're betting on it going down. And both approaches, depends on the risk appetite of the business and how the business wants to operate. We have a belief, and the belief is about enterprise buyers of energy, don't only want to reduce their costs, but they prefer a less volatile energy profile, right? So for us, it's about fixing that cost over a long time period and building these local energy markets with fixed energy costs. It depends where that starting cost is. Some people might want it with, a fixed inflation, to start at a lower price and have a fixed inflation. But that to me is not betting on the spot market risk of the energy market. A lot of users tell us that, energy prices are more volatile than Bitcoin prices. So it's to us, it's how do you operate with that organization based on their own risk appetite for energy procurement.
Yeah. I mean, aside from, I guess, creating these local energy markets, do you see an appetite for kind of more, when I say traditional, but well-established instruments like hedges, where people will be there might be a growth in some financial instruments to kind of take volatility out of these markets for people whose risk appetite is less, because that would seem like a natural evolution in the same way that airlines obviously hedge their fuel prices. That seems like a natural evolution once you create a reasonably liquid asset class like this.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a lot of our clients take us on as a hedging to their energy procurement portfolio. And because you have a energy class, you know what it is, you know what the cost is, you secured it for 10 years and it's there. And that's why a lot, of customers go to buy large scale PPAs, whether that's wind or solar. It's the same approach. And from our perspective, it's providing them with that same identical experience that they're used to.
Indeed. One final question for you, and it's something I raise with many of the participants I talk to in the marketplace around the whole kind of retrofit sustainability issue for built assets, is that particularly in developed economies, we already have most of the buildings, and most of the new buildings are built to a very, very high spec, but we clearly have a huge long tail of older buildings that aren't necessarily in many ways equipped from a kind of a structural perspective to make it easy to get solar or other kind of sustainable power sources in. How do you deal with this, and what are the ways of looking at these kind of brown buildings, these less efficient buildings, where clearly there'll still be this imperative to get them turned into some kind of energy asset and to improve their performance, where we've still got this challenge of we're stuck with these kind of older buildings and we don't want to demolish, we want to kind of have a retrofit only approach, but they're much harder than these new shiny central business district or new logistics parks that do pop up.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and to be very honest with you, that's where we see the importance of a energy network on our marketplace coming onto place. So when you take a look at the buildings that we have some buildings that on our marketplace that don't generate any energy. They purely simply buy surplus energy from a nearby shiny logistics building, for example. Because they either have a wonky roof, or they're too old, or the landlord knows that they're going to demolish it within XYZ of time, or whatever reason that doesn't allow for solar to be installed on it. But I think that is one of the, you know, when you talk about the operational carbon and how you're procuring energy and your scope 2 emissions and so on, that's an important point. So you might not have the ability to install solar on your building or a battery in your park, but at least you have the ability and choice to procure the right energy that's financially attractive for you.
Yeah, no, and I guess it emphasizes this change of mindset where we stop thinking about an individual asset as being poorly performing and think, how does it then link to this wider energy market and become a net zero building without a single PV panel in sight on that particular asset? It is a big change of mindset, isn't it, for asset owners in that way?
It is, yes, it is taking a look at your portfolios of assets as a retail energy network, and how can you optimize on it. And you know, it's again, when I drive around and I see buildings, or when I'm flying around, I don't see buildings. I see different power plants with different generation and demand profiles. And how can you use a lot of, you know, physical, obviously by installing these solar panels, but how can you use technology to optimize on that distribution, on supply demand matching, to solve a lot of the problems that we have in the grid, or solve a lot of the problems with old buildings, and how do you get your tenants what they need, or, you know, as a landlord, future proof your assets. So from our perspective, we see this as, and this is the only way this will take off, is if it becomes a win-win situation and there's an alignment. Because one of the problems is there's current misalignment between the landlords, tenants, and the grid.
Yes, I mean, as an example, again, isn't it, that it's not so much the tech, it's that collaborative piece about hearts and minds and participants in what is a difficult marketplace, commercial real estate, where you have these multiple participants, but they've all got to be aiming for the same thing. Well, John, it's been a truly fascinating discussion for the last half an hour or so. Thanks ever so much for your time, and I think a really very interesting and profound conversation around how we need to look at assets in a different way and encourage this concept of the energy asset class. But for today, John, thanks ever so much for your time, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.